Welcome to Female Founder World. I'm your host, Jasmine Garnsworthy, and today's conversation is with Jordan Rondel, founder of The Caker. Jordan, welcome to the show. I wanted to kick off by just inviting you to let everyone know in your own words what The Caker is all about.
Well, thanks for having me, first of all. The Caker is a business that I started back in 2010 in Auckland, New Zealand, where I'm from. And essentially it grew out of just the most pure, intense love for baking cakes. So in 2011, I started a bakery, which was like a made-to-order, kind of homemade style bakery, making cakes that were quite different to anything you could get at the time. And quite quickly, it turned into a really big pumping bakery, which still to this day, I don't quite understand how it all worked out, but it did. And at about year 5, I decided to, think of a way I could scale things up. While the fresh cakes are wonderful and, built the foundation of my brand, I knew that in order to really scale up, I had to have a shelf product. So that's where my line of cake was kind of born from. And 2 years ago, I moved to the States to kind of expand operations up here. So I moved to California, to LA, and set up production of the cake kits here. And we're just a little bit back to square one in terms of building up a brand and a name for ourselves in the US. But it's a really fun and exciting journey. And hoping to become a household name eventually.
Congratulations on the move. That is a big move. As someone who moved from Australia to New York 7 years ago now, I know that that's no small feat. Are you running the business with your sister? Is that what I saw on your bio?
Exactly, yeah. So whenever I say we, it's my sister and I. She joined me, about 5 years ago. She was actually a lawyer before she decided to come and work for the Caker. But together, a dynamic duo, we have such different skill sets. And so together we were really able to achieve whatever we set out to achieve.
How are you guys splitting those roles now? You're obviously the one that comes from the baking background. Are you looking after more of the product, or how do you split that?
Yeah, it's a good question. To put it in kind of, definitive terms, I'm like the creative director and she's more like the CFO or the CEO. She really handles the kind of more business side of things, the production and manufacturing of cake kits. She handles everything financial, whereas the one who develops the recipes and does most of the marketing. But in saying that, our roles do collide quite a lot and we're often working on the same thing together. It's just that she has more skills in some areas than I have skills in others. So, yeah.
So I want to kind of go back a little bit to when you first made that shift into your product line with the cake kits, because it just sounds like such a clever, interesting way of thinking. Instead of thinking, oh, I'm going to open a second location or I'm going to, focus on more bricks and mortar, to think, okay, how can I actually productize this? I thought it was such a clever approach. What were kind of the first steps from, taking what you knew as a baker and turning it into that kind of product line? How did you find those early partners in terms of manufacturers or people to do your product packaging? Where did that all come from?
Yeah, no, well, thank you for saying that. I guess it always made, because there's so much just manual labor in making one cake, we knew that wasn't what we wanted to keep expanding on. And so, the cake kits were they're essentially the same recipes that I have been baking since I started the Caker. They're just sort of adapted in a way where the consumer can literally pour it into one bowl and add a couple things and it'd be done. So I've taken recipes which, don't need equipment and are essentially like one bowl wonders. And I guess the first step was starting to, sort of adapt those recipes. Sourcing the ingredients was probably the next thing. And I guess over the years already built up quite a few really good, strong relationships with our suppliers in terms of ingredient suppliers and even our freeze-dried fruit suppliers is a big part of our cake kits. So we already had these relationships, and it turned out that our ingredient supplier, one of our main ones, had kind of it's called co-packing, had a co-packing kind of branch to their business. And we didn't even know what co-packing was at the time. This really was just a full learning curve. But it turned out that they were able to blend up the cake mixes at their facility. And that's kind of how it all started. We worked with, in terms of packaging, worked with our graphic designers to come up with, a branding concept for it, and found, it's not like from the first suppliers we use, they're not the ones we have stuck with necessarily, because say, for example, the printing company we started off with had since closed down, or it's not been a smooth journey as such. And I really do feel like it's been Anouk and I really handling every single moving part of it. We didn't outsource to anyone to get help or advice. It really was us doing all the research and all the testing and all the, everything ourselves. And I quite like that we did it that way, because we just understand the ins and outs of our product so incredibly well. It's to the point where we wish we sort of didn't even know half the stuff we know about printing and, everything. But it is good in that way. So yeah, it was just a process of, figuring out our supply chain. And as I said, it wasn't always perfect. But as soon as you hit a road bump, you learn from that and you fix it. And moving to the States to set up production here was a whole other thing, obviously.
I bet. Were you, in the early days, were you focused on selling through your website? Were you trying to find early stockists? What was your strategy in terms of distribution in the early days?
Yeah, it's a good question. I actually decided to use New Zealand as a bit of a testing ground, because I think we always knew that this product was bigger than just New Zealand, because you can't really ship anywhere from there because it's just too expensive. I think we knew that we were going to have to eventually expand into another part of the world and set up production somewhere else. So I guess I used New Zealand as a testing ground in terms of being okay, let's try it all. Let's do D2C, let's do wholesale, let's do B2B, let's focus on corporate gifting, let's do everything we can. But I think one of the first kind of big breakthroughs was getting into places like supermarkets. And they've always been in more gourmet kind of food stores, because they're not a typical F&B grocery item. But as soon as we got volume in terms of sales, everything got a bit easier, because, costs could come down and we could make everything a bit more seamless. So it was interesting approaching the wholesale model and seeing how well that could work. But we also learned that when we moved to the States, we didn't want to do that. We really wanted to be pretty much completely D2C.
And why is that?
Well, it's kind of a mixture of things. I think, obviously, margins come into it, just much, much better margins. And while we're still growing here, our production runs pretty small comparatively. So it is, those margins aren't where they should be yet. So selling directly to our customers through our website is obviously the best thing in terms of money. Also, because of the pandemic, stores have been closed. So even if we did want to be in a bunch of different departments, we actually are in department stores, but it's all e-commerce, it's all online. But it's a different thing. It's called drop shipping. So it's rather than them buying a whole bunch of stock and selling it to their customers, the customers actually buy it through, say, Bloomingdale's, but then we fulfill it. So that's a different model again, but it's a bit more D2C than the typical kind of wholesale model, which works out much better in terms of margins too. And yeah, and I think also just we wanted to have complete control over our brand from day one. So yeah, I think that was a big part of it too. You just never know. Being new to a country, you don't really know what people think of certain stores or certain outlets in that way. So, but in saying that, we are in some kind of big stores. We're in Urban Outfitters and Anthropologie and Bloomingdale's, Neiman Marcus, Macy's. So we have explored that, but as I said, it's all drop shipping. So it's really good. It's really good.
You've mentioned brand a couple of times there. And I think that, what definitely caught my eye when I saw you and saw what you were doing is the visual branding and the way that you've kind of elevated and completely changed the concept of a packet cake mix. It's not what I grew up seeing at supermarkets. It's definitely feels much more like something that I would actually use and be excited to use. For people who haven't engaged with the Caker before, can you explain, what does the brand look like? What does it feel like? What are some of those aesthetic kind of parameters that you've put around the brand that sets you apart from what you would typically find in a supermarket aisle looking at a cake mix?
Yeah, of course. Well, I guess I've always been really into the concept of like breaking that mold of like what people associate a typical baker as being. So I'm not an old French pastry chef male, or like a housewife. I walked into this industry as like a 21-year-old girl who was like in the fashion scene, and just maybe, I don't want to like blow my own horn, but I think at the time cakes weren't necessarily like fashionable back in 2010 or as fashionable as they are now. And so I think maybe I set out to kind of make cakes cool again, kind of. At least that was sort of my motto behind it. I was like, we can make this cool again. Like, let's just make cakes that taste really, really, really good. And just, bring back that concept of like a homemade style cake being cool. So I guess with that in mind, branding, it's an interesting thing because it's not something you can necessarily teach or explain, I don't think. It's kind of like, if it's an authentic brand, it's kind of just inherent in what your aesthetic is and what you believe in. So I knew that when we set out to design the cake kits that I really didn't want them to look like a cake mix. I wanted them to be completely, utterly different. So we actually took the concept of like cosmetic packaging or like maybe a perfume box and took that concept and applied it to a food product. And I think it makes it just really stand out. And it also makes it a gift. I think it makes it a very giftable product. It comes in a shiny silver box and then it's got this like almost like a Vogue cover-esque type image on the back. And and then it sort of justifies the $25 price point, I think. So I think I just set out to always do something a bit different. And of course you draw inspiration from other brands, but I think it was always really important to me to really just like come up with something completely different. Yeah.
I think the best brands are those that really bring, instead of looking to someone else in their category for inspiration, they look across different categories and they bring in different disciplines, like bringing in beauty and fashion into baking.
You're so right. Like we were actually going back through our old kind of inspiration boards the other day, and there wasn't a single food item on there. It was all like makeup or perfume or candles or like, you're right. Like looking across other categories, I think is what would make your packaging stand out in its category. Yeah.
I want to chat about content and community and storytelling. I think that that's something that you guys are doing really well. You've been doing this for 10 years now, I think. Do you have any kind of learnings or insights into how to approach content strategy or editorial planning when you're selling a D2C brand? What kind of things have been working for you?
It's a funny question because this is probably like an unpopular answer because it doesn't really offer that much solid advice, because my approach has always been to specifically not plan, which might sound crazy, but I think that way it has made everything just feel way more natural and way more authentic. And obviously we plan a new product launch, but it's not like 2 weeks out I start writing copy and, obviously I plan the shoots and stuff, but I like the approach of just like taking things as they come, because I like to just go with the flow with my content creation. And and I also think it's really important to collaborate with other creatives. So, you'll find that I often work with other brands that I love and cool photographers and cool stylists. And I think bringing those other creatives in can like help create really cool content. The other day, someone described us. They were like, you're not really like a food business. You're a media company. And I was like, wow, that's a really cool way of looking at it, because we're constantly just pumping out new content, and whether it's planned or not.
Yeah. For folks that haven't followed you in the past, what kind of content are you creating that kind of tells the story around your product? Just, to give other people maybe ideas who maybe don't have that same inherent intuitive approach to content and content marketing.
Yeah, I think it's much more than just shop now. This is why you should get this product, because that's almost too easy and too predictable. So I guess, for example, like going right back, my whole goal with the cake, or especially with the cake kits, is to make great cake more accessible to people, right? So, for example, we do a series called the Cake Crush series, and it's essentially people from around the world that I admire for whatever reason, whether they're doing something really cool they have a really cool sense of style or whatever. And I get a photographer from their hometown to go and shoot them making a cake kit. And it turns into sort of a photographic essay of this person in their home kitchen just putting their own take on this cake. And then I'll do like a little interview with them as well. And so, then you end up with these incredible photos of someone who's really inspiring in whatever way. And it's good, believable content for someone. I don't even need the cake mix to be in the shots. Like, I don't need the packaging to be in the shots. It's really about the person making it. And in the interview, I'll ask, like, who will you be sharing this cake with? And like, tell me about your favorite childhood cake. But, so it's like you can learn something at the same time. It's not just sell. And that good content should never be there.
Oh, I love that content series idea. And that's definitely, that's the kind of content that I like to come across as well. I'm not engaging with product photos. I'm definitely engaging with people on social media. So, that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, that's one example of how I do that.
I wanted to chat about the partnership with Tezza, which is how I found you. And for people that don't follow, Tezza is an influencer who also has a fashion brand and she's an entrepreneur as well. How did that partnership come about?
She actually approached us. So Cole, her husband, had stumbled across the cake somehow on Instagram and had showed it to Tezza and was just like, look at this cool brand, look at they make cake mixes, they've just moved to LA, like let's do something eventually. So they reached out to us and I was blown away. I was just like, this is amazing, because I was always such a big fan of her as well. So naturally, they were just like, we don't even know what we want to collaborate on. Let's just do something. But it just so happened to make sense to work on releasing this flavor that I'd already kind of created and work on launching that together in the States. So they designed the packaging, which is just like, I think we ended up rolling with the very first edit they gave us. It was they just like understood the brand so well, and everything just was so all slotted in so beautifully, and our aesthetics just were really symbiotic. And then we launched it and it's been really fun. It's been so good.
Those photos are so beautiful as well. My God, they're stunning. For people who haven't done like a product collaboration or something like that before, how does it work? And obviously you don't say what you're not comfortable, you know what I mean, what you're not comfortable saying, but are you splitting revenue? Are you licensing their name? Like, how does that kind of partnership work in a more general sense?
It's actually been quite different every time we've done a collaboration like this. My very first collaboration cake kit was with Karen Walker back in Auckland a few years ago. And for that one, for example, together we worked on the recipe because she's really into baking. I really wanted her to have some say in the recipe that we made. She then charged sort of a collab fee, which was not something we've done since, but because she obviously has the bigger brands than us, I think that would make sense. And then she committed to buying half of the run. So that's one way to do it. We've also done it where we're about to release a new one in the States where it's been completely different to the Tezza one, where they're supplying an ingredient at a very good price. But then they've also got a huge brand, so we're kind of benefiting off it in that way as well. So there's kind of no exchange of profit share or anything with that one. There's other ways we can do it too, where the collaborator will take a percentage of each sale. There's just so many different ways to do it, and it literally has been different for the 5 or 6 collabs we've done. It's been very different each time. I think it depends on how big the other brand is or even what they do, because if it's an ingredient that we're using and that's kind of the main component of the new flavor, that changes things too. Do you know what I mean? So it's hard to give a general outline of how that works. I do want to create a more clear-cut way of doing it. I'm working with my designers right now to be okay, so maybe there's 4 different ways it could work. You guys, we either have completely different packaging that you guys design, and then it's it's almost their product that we create. Anyway, there's 4 different ways you can do it. And I'm working on making those a bit more clear cut and figuring out, from a revenue point, how that works best for both parties too. Because it can get a bit complicated.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, the idea of using your product as a collaboration platform and all of the different ways that you can do that. And it's not something that I've done before, but it's definitely something that interests me. And especially when you're just straight up just sharing audiences, and you've just got an audience where you overlap in a really significant way, that can just be a great way to ensure you've got sell-through of a new product.
Exactly. So collaborations are a very important part of branding and a great way to get exposure for both sides.
The last question that I ask everyone who comes on the show is just to share a resource, whether that is a book, a podcast, someone that you go to, that you follow on TikTok or Instagram that has helped you grow your business that you think other people should engage with as well.
I think there's a podcast that I'm sure everyone knows about. It's called How I Built This. And I really love that one because they're usually like an hour long. So they're quite in depth. And it is just like a conversation between, I think his name's Guy, who runs it, conversation between him and the entrepreneur he's talking to, which is not necessarily about business. It's just like, it really touches on personal side of it. And there's just so much fun. And I feel like I resonate so much with like different parts of each one that I've listened to. That's a really good one. It's really inspiring. Yeah.
So I said that was the last question, but I do actually have one more now that I think of it. I wanted to actually talk about the move from New Zealand to the US. And, you know, I think a lot of people who are starting businesses that, you know, aren't in the US or aren't in a market that big, they're probably thinking about a move is going to happen at some point. Can you talk through your thinking behind the move and maybe some of the challenges? Obviously, it's paying off and it's working out, but some of the challenges and maybe some of the things that, you know, you didn't foresee when you first made that decision.
Yeah, of course. Anouk and I knew that we wanted to expand overseas. Honestly, like when we first had the concept with the Cake Kids, I think we knew that we were going to eventually do that. And it did take 3 years before we really made that move and got visas and everything. So it didn't happen overnight. And I think, you know, the first thing was choosing where to move to. And I think a lot of people in interviews ask me, why did you choose LA? And I always say that the first reason was that I, on a personal level, wanted to live here. So I think that's a super important. If you're going to move countries, you need to choose a place that you want to live. But there were other reasons, like the fact that it's a 12-hour like direct flight from New Zealand, so it's super easy to jump on a plane and go home. And I was doing that for the first while. I was going back every 6 weeks. So it was like a lot of travel, but it was fairly easy. And also, you bigger picture, like, will your product actually do well here? What are the cultural differences? And so we looked at LA and we were like, got a fantastic food scene, which is super up and coming and really exciting. A lot of our ingredients that we were using in the cake mixes in New Zealand are actually from here. For example, the ground almonds they're from California. So just little things like that. And just the fact that you're that much closer to Europe. So, you know, our Belgian chocolate was super easy to get. And also just, you know, being kind of in the center of the world, not actually, but just makes distribution to Europe or to Asia just so much easier than New Zealand. So you look at all that. First and foremost, you look at, will I be happy living there? And so I guess eventually got our visas, which is a challenge in itself, but you make it happen.
My visa situation is very complicated. I'm actually on a G visa at the moment, which is a totally different class, but I've been on the O1 visa.
I had an O1 initially, and then it wasn't the right one for someone who wants to start a business. So
are you on the O2 now?
E2. It's the investment visa.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so then honestly, the day that our visas came through, we booked a flight that next day. And you have to find an apartment. You have to figure out, get a bank account, like get a social security, like all this stuff just is, we were so daunted by it, but you just make it happen, you know. I think I was quite lucky to have a little small crew of Kiwis here already. So it wasn't just like entering into no man's land. There were people who could give me advice, and yeah, we made it happen. And I guess in terms of the business plan, it was actually very different when we first got here. I think we thought maybe we could just do the cake mixes and that would be enough, but we didn't know that. We'd never done that. We were like, no, we have to recreate exactly what we've done back home, which is bakery first. That becomes like, I use this kind of metaphor that the fresh cakes are like the couture, and then the cake mixes are like the ready to wear. So you can't really have one without the other, even though maybe the couture is like the less scalable and like there's less money there. You make most of your money off the ready to wear typically in a fashion brand like that. But you really do need both to build a brand, I think. And so we were like, we definitely need to have the bakery. We need to be making all the celebrity wedding cakes. We need to like build our brand that way. And people will understand it more if we have a cake shop, you know. And then we spent ages looking for a lease for a commercial kitchen, which turns out to be next to impossible. Nobody in LA, in the state of LA, or state of California, but like specifically LA, lets go. If they have a commercial kitchen, they do not let go of it because it is so difficult to get anything permitted or anything across the line in terms of licensing. So we kind of learned that the hard way, but also like what a relief that we didn't find something, because most places we were looking at were like completely unaffordable anyway. But when COVID hit here in March of last year, of course, all weddings, all events got cancelled. So we were like, well, thank God we don't have this huge bakery with like massive overheads. And we were like, okay, well, now we know exactly what to do. Now we know we're just going to focus on the cake kits. And I think in our guts, we sort of knew that anyway. Like we didn't have it in us necessarily to start up a bakery and hire 20 staff. And I mean, that took 10 years to build in Auckland. It's really hard work. So in a way, you know, and then obviously the cake mixes are a great product for a pandemic because people are baking at home. And so it just made sense. If we're going to look at any silver linings from the awful year that was, or 2 years almost, it would be that we had a product somewhat in the works already. We had a brand that was completely unknown, had the foundations all ready to go, and that we could just kind of make those work out. To answer your question, like, you just don't know what can happen.
Congratulations. It really sounds like you guys have landed on your feet in LA, and it's awesome to see all of the cool things that you're doing. And thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into this episode of Female Founder World. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want more from us, head to femalefounderworld.com. We have just implemented a quiz that can point you to the right resources for whatever stage you're at in your business right now. And that resource list is free. So that's femalefounderworld.com.